Hello, everybody. This is Jason Kohout. I'm joined here with our esteemed colleague, former Congressman Scott Klug. I am the chair of the Family Office department here at Foley and Lardner. This is a 10-minute interview, and the top of everybody's mind right now is the outcome of the elections. So we thought we'd just take a little bit of Scott's time and ask just the question that's on everybody's mind, which is what happened in the election, and more importantly, what's going to happen, especially for tax policy going forward in the next 2 years.
Well, it seems likely at this point, as we're recording this just a few days after the election, that the Republicans will take control of the House. The Senate is still up for grabs and may not be settled until the middle of December. So we're more likely than not to end up with divided government, which means the pace of actual legislation in Congress will slow, I think, to a halt, except for some fights at the edges. The good news, I think, is there's likely not to be a major tax bill. And I say that with the assumption that in most cases we're worried about things getting taken out that we like at the present time, rather than substantial tax cuts or changes to make the tax code better for businesses and for high net worth individuals. So I think I'd be surprised if anything major happens between now and 2024.
So we'll see most of the tax issues that came in with the Trump tax reform. Those are probably going to stay. There won't be a major issue, for the estate tax exemption and that sort of thing, Scott.
The threat always been the estate tax exemption is, and I say this not facetiously, that when they get an end of the year deals, right, and because of the Budget Act, they have to keep things revenue neutral. Somewhere there's a three-ring binder and they go through not necessarily focused on what the policy is, but they sort of look and go, oh, we can get a lot of money if we do that. So there may be a slight risk in very tiny, slight risk letters that something could happen at the end of this year before the Democrats hand over control to the House and Republicans in January. But I think the odds of that are pretty slim. There's going to be a end of the year tax extenders, as there always is at the end of the session. And there's just a few things on the table. The Democrats would really like to figure out a way to restore part of the child tax credit. The Republicans aren't going to bite on that, and I think probably will never bite on it. But the only way that would happen would be with some sweeteners that the Republicans would like to have. So the focus, I think, on the Republican side would be making permanent some of the 2017 Trump tax cuts. Part of that could be reducing the highest rate from 39.6 to I think it's 37%. And then there's also been some talk about making permanent a 20% deduction on pass-through enterprises. The other thing that's out there is the Republicans have also talked about making sure they've got accelerated depreciation schedules, because some of that goes away as well. So those are sort of the things that are in play, but I'm not really sure they can get a deal. Sometimes when you've got a turnover like this, people just want to get out of Dodge in December and sort of pick up the fight in January.
So you don't see much in the way. Do you see, like, after the new Congress is seated, do you see any possibility of some grand compromise or, something like that where the Republicans would get something, Democrats get something?
I doubt it. If you only on this stuff, again, I don't see a lot of changes coming in inheritance tax or anything like that. I just don't think the mood's going to be very friendly or collaborative. I think they're going to be hard pressed just to get the things done that they want to get done. I think there's a good chance that the Democrats will try to get the debt ceiling passed in December in the waning days of the session, so that doesn't hang over the president as a leverage point for Republicans where they could come back and ask for some of the tax stuff. So I don't see a very productive year in 23. I think the first thing Republicans are going to do is start investigations into the White House, which will set the tone and we'll sort of go from there. So it's going to be, Hunter Biden all the time for the first 90 days, I think, is the way this is going to go. I'm just being honest.
Do you see, is there anything that's going to create a need for extreme revenue raisers? So like you talked about the debt ceiling. As long as that's approved, there's nothing that's pressing to actually start increasing taxes or do revenue raisers, right?
Yeah, I don't think there'll be any pressure that way whatsoever. I mean, I guess if the economy would take a tailspin and we get in a severe recession next summer, could Congress try to do something to try to get the economy ginned up again? I mean, it's more likely the Federal Reserve will act before Congress could. If that's the case, then there had to be another stimulus plan. We'll like wind down the interest rates and then have to stimulate them again to cause other problems in the economy. I mean, there's a slim chance of that. One of the other things that will only affect a very small percentage of the audience watching this is there's a lot of issues that are hanging over from the inflation. Uh, what was the middle act of the IRA? Not the IRA you put money into, but the spending on alternative energy. The White House rarely gets involved in telling Treasury when tax bills pass, here's our priorities, but there's so many unresolved issues in that with, what electric cars actually qualify for subsidies. Do the electric chargers actually have to be made in the United States? Is there a subsidy involved in that? Then I think that's really going to consume the White House and consume the Treasury because they're trying to get all those regulations out the door in the next 4 or 5 months. And as you know, Jason, most of the time when a tax bill gets passed, there's provisions that there's no clarification on for 2 years.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I think that will be another focus that will consume a lot of the time in terms of what the Biden administration wants to do with Treasury. And then the other thing, obviously, that hangs out there is the huge new hiring
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that,
acceleration at the
Scott, 'cause
IRS,
the
which I
Republicans
think
will
along
focus
with
on that. They made a
along
campaign
with
issue of it.
yeah, well, and I think the perception is how much of this is backroom stuff, right? Just to try to get computers done and have people who can process returns to solve this massive backlog, and how much of it is IRS agents ringing your doorbell and showing up and trying to accelerate audits, and that'll be sort of a tug of war. But given the fact that I think it's very likely that Republicans won't take the majority, I think their ability to cut any of that IRS additional spending, I think will prove to be pretty elusive.
That seems to be the thing that is on a number of minds. Scott, the only other question, sounds like we're going to be in for deadlock and not a ton of changes in the next 2 years. And so for estate planners, that means that December 31st, 2025 is the day of reckoning, the use it or lose it period for the estate tax exemption, as well as some other tax provisions. Do you think there's any, we talked a little bit about this. Do you think there's any specific areas where, like, I'll just throw out cryptocurrency or marijuana regulation, where we could see movement, even though we see deadlock overall?
Well, in cryptocurrency, I think like the fight over the tech industry, it's an interesting, both of those are interesting battles, right? Because you've got bipartisan, bicameral allies on
Right.
both sides of that, right? And so there's a chance both of those could move. I don't think there'll be action on marijuana just because there's enough Republicans who will fight it. And while some states just approved marijuana legalization, other states turned it down. So I think that's still likely to be a state by state fight. Unless for some reason people all of a sudden decide they want to legalize it on the federal level so they can collect more federal taxes out of that, which is always a possibility. But I just don't think this is going to be a period of very robust engagement. And I don't think the White House has got the political capital to fight a big tax battle.
Got it. So we're looking at more status quo, deadlock. Anything anything other than that, Scott? Any of note, or is it just we're looking at kind of the laws that we have today, and there's not going to be much in the way of change? Do you see any area where we could see some change or compromise or something moving in the next 2 years?
Oh yeah, on stuff other than taxes. And again, I think if it's on taxes, it'll only be the margin. I think for the firm and its clients, the only time I would worry about anything is the end of the year deal. Just because if they decide they want to fund this over here, then they're going to have
Right.
money to pay for it over there. I just don't think that's likely to happen. My hunch is they'll just do a continuing resolution and kick everything down the road till February. And especially, the Democrats and the Republicans are both going to have to do leadership elections, especially in the House. And with, the question is, does Nancy Pelosi stay or does she go? the fact that the Republicans underperformed. Now there are questions about whether McCarthy's actually got his arms around the speaker's title very firmly, or whether there's going to be blowback. When I was in Congress in the 90s and the Republicans underperformed in the 96 election, people won't remember this unless you're really on the inside, is that John Boehner got thrown off the leadership team theoretically for the political wilderness, only to come back as the speaker, 10 years later. So there'll be, I think on the Republican side and the Democratic side, there's going to be a lot of tension about Pelosi and the very senior leadership, because they're all in their 80s. And then on the Republican side, McCarthy, well, he didn't necessarily have control on anything, I think is likely to take a hit for not capturing more Republican seats. And so there could be leadership battles. Now, for folks who are watching this, they're going, if I cared about that stuff, I'd watch Meet the Press on a Sunday morning. But the answer is those are distractions from them being able to do anything of substance in the balance of 22. So I think once we get to December, everybody can let their breath out.
We can, and we will have, but there will be a end of year tax something.
Extender deal, yeah. They've always got battles over,
right,
there's fights going on over how come solar got more credits than fuel cells. And, if you look at some of the analysis that's been done, for example, on the car subsidies, which was supposed to be a big headline if you bought an EV vehicle, there are very strict restrictions on how much of is the car manufactured in the U.S., how much of the components come from the U.S., and how much of the materials used to make the components are in the U.S. And the last analysis from the Congressional Budget Office said there were only subsidies for about 20,000 vehicles in the U.S. because there's also caps on how many cars each manufacturer can sell. So if you take, Ford and GM and Tesla out of the world, there's not a lot of stuff. So those are the sort of things that could try to tweak at the end of the session. Those are the issues that the Treasury Department are wrestling with, not only on the infrastructure bill, but on the IRA bill. And so there could be a lot of movement around that. There's a lot of unresolved issues. And what that means is that is going to consume the time that's available, aside from the organization and aside from the sort of internal political fights going on with Republicans and Democrats. It's less time for monkey business to affect people like you and folks who are in the private sector and making it work.
Scott, we really appreciate your time and your update from Washington. We will keep our eyes peeled as we go through the end of the year to see if anything comes up. Because as you know, I think that's what we said. Every time I've talked to you, the answer is the legislation has been written. We all know it, and somebody can cut and paste at any time. So we'll
yeah, and we're happy to touch base again back in December if it looks like things are getting tricky. But my hunch 60 days out, this is like the NFL on a Sunday morning, is I don't think that's how it's going to play itself out. But as soon as I say that, you'll be calling me December 1st saying, and we'll stay on top of it. And I should tell folks that we've got a lobbying team that's very aggressive in Washington and often gets involved in tax fights. And we've got wonderful relationship on both the House Ways and Means Committee and Senate Finance. So we're a phone call away if we can help with anything specific.
That's great. Thanks, Scott. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jason.
We'll talk to everybody later. Thank you.